Hi, welcome today. My name is Kirsten Lovett, and Marissa Lovett and I are doing a 2-day Sacred Sites webinar. And I'm just going to wait for some people to show up. And while we get started, before I actually get started, because I have quite a few things to go through today, I'm just going to whistle a little power song. So I might close my eyes just right quick and just want to let you know that's what I'm going to do here. Okay. Oh, first I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay, so I just wanted to do that to get myself centered, and maybe that helped you all get centered too. Welcome today, and today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about 3 different places, and it's really just an effort to give you an idea of what is a sacred site, or a holy place, a power place. I'm basically going to look at some research that I've collected from several different areas, and I'll let you know as I go through who they're from and whether they're from stories or if it's from an actual article or something. And so just bear with me as we fly from place to place here. Just to give you a heads up of what it's going to be is, first I'm going to start with we're going to go to Stonehenge first for a couple minutes. Then we're going to flit over to Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming just for a couple of story there. And then we're going to go to Florida. So first, water, agua. Okay, so both Marissa and I, and you'll hear her talk about this tomorrow as well, agree on this definition of what is a sacred site. So what are we talking about here? A sacred site is a natural or man-made place that is very powerful. It has been honored and worked with for generations. These places are a collaboration between human intent and the natural forces of energy of that place. Holy mountains, rivers, stone circles, like Stonehenge, and many temples are examples of this type of place. And I'd like to emphasize that I tend to focus more on, instead of just buildings, I tend to focus more on actual earth origin or earth formations that come from the earth. But before we get into Stonehenge, I just want to tell you a little bit of a Swedish, it's a kind of a current folk story from Sweden. And it's a recent account of the influence of a sacred site. And if you can picture this happening in Sweden recently. This person said when they grew up, they used to play soccer. And they used to use these 2 standing stones as goalposts. And next to their playground where they played soccer was a burial mound. And this was from the Bronze Age, this burial mound, where they had names of gods in place names, and that was commonplace in that area. And so you heard a lot about gods in place names and local spirits and local folklore from older relatives and in school. So even though that's in Sweden, that just gives you an idea of that happened in the last 30 years or so. And so you can see the continuity of what happened in the long ago past is still kind of with us today in certain parts of the world. More agua. Okay, so we're going to look at Stonehenge now. And just before I tell you about this, this is taken from, and you can go hear this yourself if you like. If you have iTunes, of course, a lot of you do. On iTunes, if you type in Merlin's Magic Circles, it's a podcast. It's like a video presentation that's in the iTunes section. It's called Merlin's Magic Circles, Stonehenge and the Use of the Preseli Stones, Blue Stones, excuse me. It's by Timothy Darville, and he's from Bournemouth University. So I'm just going to give you a little bit about his presentation. So one of the things he talks about is this, there's a story he mentions about where, if you can picture the circle, a lot of you have seen the circle, there's an outer rim, of course, the standing stones. And then inside that outer rim of standing stones, there are these, what they call blue stones. So I'm talking about the inner, well, the more inner circles of that ring. So there's stories of breaking off bits of this blue stone, which is found inside the Stonehenge. And what they did is, long ago, they broke off bits of this blue stone and they used it as talismans for healing. And this is a very powerful story, of course. They even used it as recently as the 18th century. So that's a lot closer than 2,000 years ago. For curative properties. These stones were used, they believe, for healing. Now, up until about 1901, the state in England, they banned the breaking off of bits of the blue stones for healing. So nobody does that anymore. Bits of this blue stone, which I want to mention, is from Wales, in a place called the Preseli, and they were brought over to Stonehenge in England. But they found out that bits of this blue stone are actually found in burials around Stonehenge. These blue stones were placed, these little bits of blue stone were placed inside the graves during the Beaker era. One example of the stones is called, for you, anybody who's a rock hound, is called spotted dolerite, D-O-L-E-R-I-T-E, in case you're interested. And they were placed inside the graves. This I thought was really interesting because I had no idea until I listened to his presentation that Stonehenge is very closely connected with water. You know, everyone sees the pictures of the stone ring and you just kind of think that's all there is out there. But actually, Stonehenge is very close to the Avon River. And the Preseli stones that were brought over from Wales over to Stonehenge, where they come from, they're also closely associated with water. Also, one of the roles in Stonehenge was that it was a pilgrimage center or a ceremonial center where people came from a distance to receive healing. Now, I do want to stress that Timothy Darville says that he makes a kind of a big deal out of this, that he says that Stonehenge was believed to be a center for healing. He doesn't actually come out and say that it was a center for healing. So I want to go out and definitely say I think it was a center for healing. I'm not an archaeologist, so I don't have to worry about that. So, but he made a big deal out of that. But he did at least say that it was believed at that time to be a center for healing for prehistoric people. And just a little bit about, to cap off about these blue stones, which were so powerful, from Wales. They were transported to Stonehenge originally from Wales, from a place called Carn Menyn. So that's M-E-N-Y-N. And this provided 80 blocks of stone for Stonehenge. And these stones in the Preselis, as I mentioned before, were very closely associated with springs. So here again, I'm tying in that theme of springs, stones, and healing, even from, I think it's a good 200 plus miles away from, I think it's called Wiltshire, which is where Stonehenge is located. So that's just a little bit about Stonehenge, and I'm going to take a breath here. Hi, Justina. Thank you for coming. And gotta have more water. Oh, excuse me. It's incredibly dry here today. Okay, so I want to tell you, one last thing about Stonehenge. This is actually a story about a woman who actually received a song, and I'd like to thank Marissa Lovett for relaying this story to me that she picked up. It demonstrates how sacred sites, ritual, and the fire element can heal apathy, self-doubt, and blocks to creativity. A woman traveled to Stonehenge for the summer solstice. As she stood within the stone circle, she heard the words of a chant. The chant became the first song of a new CD. She said, "That was the moment my life changed. That 1 hour at Stonehenge changed my entire life, my focus, my future. I was ready to give up music before that trip." So I love that story. That's just such a beautiful real life experience of the power of these ancient healing places. And so now we're going to go over to the Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a what they call traditional knowledge from that area, excuse me. And this gives you a better idea of the spiritual relationship between sacred sites and, in this case, Native American people. The Bighorn Medicine Wheel in Wyoming was believed to have been built about 1,500 years ago. And the Medicine Wheel is a sacred site to many tribes, including the Cheyenne, the Crow, and the Shoshone. And according to Crow oral tradition, the early 19th century leader Red Plume did his vision quest at the Medicine Wheel. It is reported that he was visited by the Little People, who took him into the earth and gave him his medicine. Later in life, as he lay dying, he told his people that his soul would return to the Medicine Wheel after his death, and that the people could talk to him there. I love that story. To me, that feels very real about a place where I'm sure once I go out there, I will definitely remember that story as a reality of that place. And you can see the importance that that particular medicine wheel has on the people in that area. I'm just going to take a little bit of a drink of water. Oh, and I want to see here also, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask me. I'll try and get to them before the end of the presentation here. So hopefully this isn't going over too quickly. Basically, now we're going to go to Florida, which is where I live currently. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the springs here. In Florida, there are nearly 600 springs, and these springs in Florida have been attracting humans for thousands of years for their life-giving and healing properties. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Little Salt Springs, which is in Sarasota County. In this example, Little Salt Springs not only provided a spring, of course, but it also served as a cemetery for the people of the Archaic period. And this next quote is from an article by Rachel Wentz and John Gifford. It's called "Florida's Deep Past, Little Salt Springs." Little Salt Springs, like several archaic cemeteries in Florida, is characterized as a mortuary pond. Mortuary ponds are small bodies of water used as sites of interment for the dead. Mortuary ponds, like Little Salt Springs, are bound mostly to Florida's Archaic period. These ponds, with histories extending back thousands of years, may indicate cultural, and I think ritual as well, continuity among these early inhabitants. And I think they also give us the deep importance of water in reference to sacred sites in Florida. Excuse me. Now I want to share just a little bit about mounds, because in lots of parts of North America, mounds are well known throughout the area, and of course Central America as well. But this is from something called New Insights on the Woodland and Mississippi Periods of West Peninsular Florida. And this is by George M. Luer, L-U-E-R. In West Peninsular Florida, Native Americans built large burial mounds in significant locations to serve as monuments where often relatively small numbers of individuals were interred. These mounds were sacred places. Some of these mounds are more than 2,000 years old. And I like the fact that in this article, George also added something about our current predicament. And he said, "It must be stressed that the region's sites have suffered from 20th century, of course in this case 21st century, land development, and many cited in this chapter have been destroyed. These sites desperately need better preservation and more appreciation." And I want to add something. You can look at online, the Florida Division of Historical Resources, I believe, has links to state parks, and a lot of these links will show you where mounds are. Like, for example, in my area, our area here is Sarasota, and even in our area they have several different names for one place. For example, there's a place called Emerson Point, but it also is called Parish Mound. So that's the same place, which I didn't even know that, and that place was an actual Indian burial mound. Another place a lot of people know about is in Osprey. They have a place called Historic Spanish Point. And of course I mentioned the springs. We have Little Salt Springs, but we also have Warm Mineral Springs, which also is at least, I think at first they thought it was 5,000, but now I think they think it's more like 10,000 years old. So, and there's just tons of information online about that as well. So just want to check and see if there's any questions. And let me grab one more bit of water here. I just want to give you a little bit of a conclusion here and just let you know my personal thoughts. I feel that part of our current dilemma in our modern 21st century society could be solved by reconnecting with sacred sites in a respectful way. In these times of climate change, this budding relationship with sacred sites continues to be a source of comfort and understanding, and has helped me to see how to better relate to the earth respectfully. And I hope that it's helped you too, just to hear some of these stories and bits and pieces of information about these places. I hope it's given you a little bit of a sampling of the history and how it affects us today. Just want to check, no questions? Okay, so basically, just to wrap up here, since I'm a little early, but if you do have any questions. Oh, before I tell you a little bit about our Patreon page, I've had some experience with sacred sites. My favorite site that I've been to around here, I haven't been there in a while, but there's Emerson Point I mentioned just a few minutes ago. That's a really wonderful place to go, because that's an actual burial mound. And I had some very powerful experiences when I went there with Marissa. We did some healing for the earth there close to 10 years ago. And I had some very interesting experiences I had never had before anywhere else. Mostly because I think that was a very natural setting where even though it's a park and there's a lot of people going in and out of there, it still seemed to have some preservation of the wildness of it, and it didn't seem to have as much distortion in the energy due to over tourism, or now I'm not sure what it's like now, but oh, let me see what Justina says. how can we use these places for our well-being? Meditation sure is amazing there. Taking a piece of nature from it, like a little stone, and use it to connect to this energy at home. Okay, Marissa's going to talk about that quite a bit tomorrow, so I encourage you to tune into that. I personally, yeah, meditation is always very good. I don't think this can be stressed enough that if you go to a power place or a sacred place, always ask for permission, even if you have to think it in your mind. If there's a lot of people around and you don't want to be talking, out loud, just think it in your mind, or blow. Maybe it'd be probably better to blow a little prayer to the place. For example, I go over to a place that's like maybe a mile away from my house, and sometimes I'll just take a little bit of offering of something like tobacco or whatever, and I'll just blow and just ask for permission, especially if I'm going to do some kind of ceremony there, or maybe ask for some kind of communication from that place. Ask for healing if you have any healing requests for you or your family, or if you want to ask for healing for that place too. But just try to ask it permission. And let me give you actually a little story that I hadn't planned on sharing, but I think it's kind of pertinent to your question, Justina. This I had mentioned just before, where Marissa and I about 10 years ago went over to this place called Emerson Point Preserve, and we had been there a few times with our healing bundles, and we'd also gone without them, but we were trying to kind of establish a link with this place and get it to kind of communicate with us, because we knew the mound was there. So I remember we took, I think it was Florida water, Agua de Florida, and I remember taking this Florida water, thinking that I was gonna kind of go up to the one or two trees, because I kind of picked up on this feeling like the trees were kind of they weren't horribly unhappy, but they weren't exactly thrilled either. And I couldn't tell if it was something that had been happening there recently or whatever. So I just thought, okay, I'll just, I'll go up to this tree, and, because I want to get close to it, I'm going to spritz it, right, with some Florida water. And I remember Marissa was next to me, and I stopped for a second, and she said, well, why don't you ask it first? And so I asked it permission. I literally heard it say to me, no. And so I was like, okay. I put it back. So I think that's, a clear indication of some trees just don't want to be bothered. And I'm not saying that's going to happen every time. There's other times when you just may have to leave an offering several times. It may take a year. It may take 3 years. I mean, I've had to do that with places in my neighborhood where I've had to leave offerings for years before I actually received any kind of communication, of any kind of verification of, we hear you, or we want you to do this, or we want you to do that. So, bear in mind, if you travel and go somewhere foreign to your neighborhood, you may have a powerful experience there, you may not, because, this is about relationship. And this is about, you have to look at these places like if you can visualize them as people, you wouldn't just yank somebody's hand and say, hey man, let's go hang out, you're and I are best buddies, let's go. I mean, they don't know you, you don't know them. It's if you can kind of visualize them as a person, that might help a little bit. So I know I rambled on a little bit, but I think those stories kind of do demonstrate the ideas of respect for the place, ask it permission, but bear in mind, something great might happen that day. But just so you know, if it doesn't, don't be dissuaded from continuing to try to build a relationship. So, okay, good. I'm glad, Justina. I'm glad that hopefully that helps answer it a little bit. Hi, Linda. Thank you guys for joining, and everybody who's listening. And go ahead and those kinds of topics, bear in mind that Marissa will bring up those topics tomorrow. So just to let you know, these replays that we're doing today and tomorrow will be up until this Friday. And if you sign up for the sign up link, you know, the little EE Pearl, you get a free gift about the masculine and feminine aspects of sacred sites, which is a wonderful thing. I think it outlines some of the principles I was talking about. We're also on, Marissa and I are also on a place called Patreon, Patreon, and our Patreon subscribers never have to sign up for future webinars. They get all the free gifts, replays, plus extra exclusive content. Just to give you an idea of some of the topics we cover, of course, sacred tobacco, sacred sites, shamanic dreaming, and just other kinds of traditional medicine, indigenous wisdom. It could expand from there, but those are basically the areas of interest that we have right now, and we're having a great time growing that community, and we welcome you to join it. It's called patreon.com/shamanic earth medicine. So in closing, please join Marissa tomorrow for her experiential sacred sites webinar, and I really thank you all for joining me today. And I just hope this has been a fun experience for you, and keep building your relationship with your power spots and places in nature. And thanks for joining me. Have a great day.